So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find in the 61st chapter very important, because as we read, we understand a few sections of what we know as the Bible, or the Holy Bible, and where it comes from. So then, as we as English people, from the English line, and the language widely used mostly in this world, we must understand ourselves as being these kind of people, resilient and honest, people always engaged in fair understandings and fair dealings. We are watching then television and TV and newspaper, reading newspaper, or then reading the internet. We found this absolutely scandalous situation in France regarding this ridiculous newspaper making fun of religions and so on and so forth. And truly they have some sort of amazement on making fun of other nations and religions. But then the gathering of the important figures or important authorities of nations coming together and joining up in France is somewhat ridiculous. So then let's understand why this truly is ridiculous. There is another point of this visit and this absolutely scandalous situation that went on in France, in Paris, regarding this newspaper. Let's then make an evaluation of what's going on in the world from the viewpoint of the original manuscripts. But firstly then, we must admit the world has come out of 1,000 years of deceit. So then, from the standpoint of a linear understanding, because the holy instructions, or then the Hebraic understanding, is always linear. The 1,000 years of the Savior is already gone. From the time he ascended until roughly 1009 by the Gregorian calendar, where then the Muslims then destroy Jerusalem, and for the first time the tomb was destroyed. The tomb from where the Messiah or the Savior then came out of. It was for the first time then destroyed. So the world made a declaration that the holy cities were no more. Thus then 1,000 years of Satan or Nahashatan, and ended in 2009. So we are then during the time of the restoration of these cities that were prior of 1009. And there are lies everywhere, lies and lies upon lies, and scoundrels, and you can name it. Pastors lying, rabbis lying, everybody's lying. Because they got used to 1,000 years of lying, lying, lying. Let's take, for example, the understanding of Egypt and the 10 plagues. So directly as an Englishman, and responsible and resilient and honest, you have to ask, how then can Egypt muster an army to go after the Hebrews when the entire land was then involved with destruction of every male on the land? So the 10 plagues had never taken place. Those were dreams Pharaoh had, and Moses was only there to interpret them. Then when Pharaoh decided on the 10th dream he had, he let some of the people go, some roughly 600,000 people. But those were cheap labor. They were slaves. And then the people went out. And then later on, he did understand he was deceived. Not because he was deceived, he had a very realistic dreams, and back then it was a big taboo. They had to have an explanation, and Moses was there, obviously, to explain it. So for centuries, pastors, teachers, rabbis of many kinds in Israel or not, they are liars. Explaining all the 10 plagues and so on and so forth, and Egypt was devastated. They were never devastated. There was never 10 plagues. So you must understand, they can't gather an army from a situation that the country was absolutely destroyed. And the Creator himself, in his character, he would never destroy a nation without first giving his holy instructions. Similarly, you find in Daniel, when he was serving under the kings, he used to go near the river after his duty. Then he had a day of work, and when his day of work ended, he used to go to the river, and there he used to take a nap. Thus he had the visions and understandings of Daniel. The same way, for instance, when Moses was in the desert of Midian over there, and then there was an animal from the flock that ran away from his herd, and he went after the stupid beast. They couldn't find the stupid animal, and he was tired, and he was only taking a rest over there. While he was then resting, he saw the vision of the burning bush. So for centuries, people, they think, oh, Moses was wandering in the desert and saw then a burning bush. He did not. He went after the stupid animal that got away from his herd, and after a long time, couldn't find the stupid beast, and then he was taking a rest. While he was doing so, he had the vision. But the distinctive portion of it is then God said, then okay, you don't want to do it? Fine, take your brother with you. So then when Moses, because he had murdered some of the people of there in Egypt, and surely was then a guard, and obviously was related with the military of Egypt, then he was absolutely deadly afraid of them. And obviously he did not want to return to Egypt. But then when he visited with his brother, then his brother mentioned of the vision, because they both had the same vision in distinct places. So there are thousands of scoundrels in this world. But do they want to know the truth? Well, we must know the truth and teach the truth. It was 1,000 years of dormancy. And they invented stories, and they did say stories, and they invented more stories, and they related with more junky stories. But we must say the truth. So these are few understandings of the importance of these times, because as China then holds 57% of the world's market by itself, we must then understand this point. You have the East and you have the West. The East was always prosperous. Then you find later on, when the cities of the Messiah were destroyed, and when Jerusalem was destroyed, then in 1009, then the whole situation came towards the West. Thus then, for 1,000 years then, the West had done its duty. During this time of 1,000 years, 800 years, Great Britain had then obviously defended the trade during this period, and then the last couple of hundred years was United States. But now we have China. And China has a preference of the Soviet Union protecting China's trade. So what do you think then is going to take place? The Soviet Union is going to work on behalf of China, protecting then the trade of China. That's what we know of as Dragonic period. Simply means precision of trade via computer. That's the dragon. So when we read Revelation, for instance, and that Satan, and the adversary, and then the slanderer, or devil, or then the dragon, each of those names, they have a specific time and season. We are doing the Dragonic period, precision, where you find then computerized e-trade systems being implemented around the world. Now, the West and the partners of the West, they are absolutely desperate because they don't know what to do with the situation. They can't come up with a system of their own. Now, what China has done thus far, they are promoting private banks, and these banks are specialized in e-trade. And then people who are involved with these banks of China, they take their own money from their own bankings or savings or checking, and they begin to invest in the Chinese industry. China has already a system over there that protects their own industries. So if by chance you have your money invested in a company on products, and if these industry goes bankrupt, instantly you get your money back. So then the West, it's absolutely bankrupt. Europe is not doing nicely. And then they came together in France and saying, oh, they are so concerned because of these people who are coming, and then people get shot. Whom these people they are thinking on deceiving? It's not the leaders of this country being concerned with people. What they want is they are throwing one against each other. So they're going to try to work with these economies one more time to try to save it what 1,000 years of junk never worked. China is going to lead. And we as English people, we must understand and make the proper preparations so then we don't get caught unawares in the future. Banks and regular banks of the West and those junky kind of trade they are doing around the world is nearly obsolete. Banks are going to get linked with the production of industries as the primary way of investment. Thus, infrastructure. Now, you want me to lie to you to say then, oh, China is not going to be the grandest factory of the world and trying to result in some sort of a fixing of the old system that never worked? Based on lies and cheats, and then what the United States did in 2008 was an absolutely a gambling that they did with the mortgage crisis and the destruction of the economy of America? Is that what they're going to try to fix, a system already bankrupt? So this visit over there in France with these leaders over there is absolutely a piece of junk. It is true that those people that died, they should be obviously recognized. But going along with this forward motion of France trying to come up with some sort of a leadership and blah 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 is junk. China will to lead. And we must prepare ourselves because these banks are going to be ready in roughly 5 months. And people are going to start taking out their money from checkings and savings and investing in the Chinese system. Now, US is bankrupt. Germany is absolutely out of control in Europe. What else would they expect to what Daniel has said? And they try to adhere to each other, but they would not. Now, as far as Israel must be cleaned, they are replete with scoundrels and rabbis that are simply liars. How can they teach over and over again, either in the Shabbat or on Sunday, that there were 10 plagues in Egypt and then mustering an army afterwards? Let's make sure we understand the simplicity of the Holy Instructions as a guide. And understand China leads during this time of the Dragonic period, and absolutely nothing is going to change it. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.